Winter clung to Highthorne Hall with a grim, silencing grip, as though the ancient stones themselves wished to hush every careless breath. Within its shadowed corridors moved Lady Elara Wynsor, her steps light, presence nearly invisible by practiced necessity. Once the daughter of a respected baron, she now served as companion to the Duchess Dowager Anne Arrangement Society considered charitable, though Elara understood it better as punishment for a family ruined by scandal and a father's ill-fated choices. Morning preparations for the season's first gathering had set the household in motion, but Elara moved quietly, smoothing table linens and arranging polished silver as though born to servitude. She felt the eyes of the other attendants follow her, some with sympathy, others with sharp curiosity. They all knew her history. They all knew how far she had fallen, and yet she maintained a dignified composure, determined that no whisper, no lingering stare, would rob her of what little pride she still possessed by midday. The great hall shimmered with candlelight despite the hour, for the Duchess Dowager believed daylight too harsh for receiving guests. Elara adjusted a candelabrum, her fingers steady even as her stomach tightened with the familiar dread such gatherings inspired. Nobles drifted in, wrapped in silks and hauteur, their conversations filled with a kind of careless cruelty only privilege affords. She felt their gazes skim over her, calculating, remembering. Judge in each glance a reminder that she existed at their mercy. Lady Marblestone arrived last. Her voice floated across the hall like the rasp of silk over stone, and Elara stiffened before the woman even approached. Known for her beauty, and sharper still for her talent in wounding reputations, Lady Marblestone surveyed the room with predatory delight. When her eyes landed on Elara, a slow smile unfurled. It was the smile of one who had waited patiently for an opportunity to strike, and now found the stage perfectly arranged. "Elara Wynsor," Lady Marblestone called, her tone dripping with false sweetness. The hall quieted. Elara stepped forward, hands clasped, head bowed just enough to appear respectful without appearing weak. Marblestone circled her like an appraiser examining flawed merchandise. She asked after Elara's father, after his debts, after the foreclosure that stripped their lands. Inquiry delivered with a softness that only magnified the cruelty beneath. Murmurs rippled outward. The heat crept into Elara's cheeks as the sting of public disgrace settled over her once more, to escape their stares. Elara retreated toward a serving table, but her trembling hands betrayed her. A crystal goblet slipped from her grasp and shattered upon the marble floor, the sound echoing through the hall like a gunshot. Conversation halted. Nobles turned, their expressions painted with smug satisfaction or poorly concealed amusement. Elara knelt to gather the shards, her vision blurring, her breath catching. Each fragment glittered like a verdict, confirming what society had already decided. She belonged among broken things. Then the doors opened, and the air shifted with palpable force. The Duke of Ravensmoore entered Alistair, heir 2 centuries of power, a man whose authority seemed woven into the very stones beneath their feet. His presence compelled silence more effectively than any command. Cloaked in black, his posture rigid with military precision, he surveyed the hall with a gaze that spared no detail. When his eyes found Elara kneeling amid the broken glass, something unreadable flickered across his expression. He stepped forward, the crowd parting instinctively. "Rise," he said, his voice even but carrying a weight that left no room for disobedience. Elara obeyed, though her hands trembled. She attempted an explanation, some fragile defense of her clumsiness, but the Duke raised a hand, stopping her words mid-breath. "Do not question me," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. The reprimand stung, yet beneath it she sensed something unexpected, a hint of concern quickly concealed. He dismissed the onlookers with a single hard glance, then crouched beside her to gather the remaining shards. The gesture shocked her more than his command. A duke did not kneel on marble floors for anyone, least of all a disgraced woman whose presence embarrassed the room. His gloved hand brushed hers by accident, or intentioning. She inhaled sharply. For an instant, the hall vanished, leaving only the warmth of that fleeting touch and the troubling truth that neither seemed prepared to acknowledge when they rose. The hall had resumed its slow hum, yet the mood had altered. Elara felt every heartbeat like a warning bell. The Duke inclined his head, a gesture too courteous for one of his rank, then turned away to greet arriving dignitaries. But she sensed tension in the rigid line of his shoulders, as though something about their encounter unsettled him. She wished to retreat, to disappear into the anonymity of her duties. Yet she found herself rooted, shaken in ways she could neither name nor master. A servant brushed past her, whispering that the Duchess Dowager required assistance. But Elara struggled to steady her breath before moving. She sensed eyes upon her, some pitying, others gleefully anticipating her downfall. What troubled her most, however, was the awareness of the Duke's gaze seeking her across the hall. Each time she dared glance toward him, she found him watching with an intensity that unsettled her more than ridicule ever could. Something had shifted irrevocably, and she feared the consequences as much as she felt drawn toward them. She turned at last toward the corridor, leading to the Duchess Dowager's chambers. Yet each step felt weighted with an awareness she could not shed. The hall behind her swelled again with conversation, but she felt certain that whispers now carried her name in tones of speculation rather than disdain. Still, she knew better than to trust the moment. Whatever had passed between herself and the Duke was fragile, unspoken, and vastly improper. And as she crossed the threshold, she sensed that this single day had set into motion forces neither of them could hope to control at all. The morning after the gathering unfolded with a tense stillness, as though the entire estate had absorbed the shock of what transpired. Elara moved through her duties with more caution than usual, aware that every corridor held the memory of yesterday's humiliation, and every servant seemed to carry a version of the story. Yet beneath that unease lingered something far more dangerous, the memory of the Duke kneeling beside her, helping her gather the shattered glass. She wished she could erase it, for it returned to her mind with treacherous warmth, softening a world that had shown her no mercy. Alistair Ravensmoore, for his part, descended to breakfast later than usual. His presence in any room altered its rhythm, but today he carried a sharper edge, as though burdened by an unseen weight. He greeted no one beyond a curt nod and absorbed himself in correspondence. Yet even from a distance, Elara felt the gravity of his mood. Something troubled him, and she knew reluctantly that she shared responsibility for it. Their brief encounter had rippled farther than either intended. It had unsettled the guests, muddied the whispers, and scratched at the surface of the Duke's carefully maintained detachment. Elara avoided his gaze while attending to the Duchess Dowager, who required arrangements for an afternoon visit. Though the older woman spoke with her usual crisp authority, Elara sensed a prickling alertness in her tone, sign she, too, had noticed the shift in atmosphere. Servants often carried tales to their superiors, and the sight of the Duke stooping to assist anyone, least of all Elara, had surely reached the wrong ears. The Duchess asked nothing outright, yet her silence weighed heavily, as though she were waiting to see which fault line would crack first. By noon, Elara retired briefly to her small chamber at the back of the east wing, a modest room that had once belonged to a governess. She intended only to rest before continuing her duties, but upon entering, she halted. Something lay upon her pillow, a velvet-wrapped object, its deep blue fabric catching the dim light with quiet elegance. Her breath caught as she approached, her fingertips brushing the soft material before she carefully unfolded it. Inside rested a bookcase exquisite, the leather-bound volume of poetry she had admired once in the manor library, but never dared to touch. Its gilded edges glimmered faintly, each line of embossed text pristine. She opened it cautiously, her heart thudding in her chest. Between the pages lay a single pressed winter rose, pale as frost, delicate as regret. No note accompanied it, no signature. Yet only one man in Highthorne Hall owned a collection containing such rare editions, and only one man had looked at her yesterday as though something within him trembled. The Duke, panic fluttered in her chest. A gift from a man of his standing. Even something as seemingly innocent as a book could be interpreted as impropriety of the highest order. A scandal could bloom from the smallest whisper, and whispers had already taken root. She closed the book and held it tightly, a painful mix of gratitude and dread twisting within her. Whatever his intentions, she could not permit him to endanger himself for her sake. Her resolve solidified. She would return the book at once. She found him in the library, afternoon light spilling over his shoulders as he studied a document with furrowed concentration. The warmth of the fire cast golden light across his features, sharpening the sternness of his expression, yet revealing a rare weariness beneath it. When he lifted his gaze, their eyes met, and the room seemed to shift around them. "My lord," she began, bowing her head, though her voice trembled despite her efforts. "I believe there has been a mistake." She extended the wrapped book toward him, hoping he would accept it quickly and put an end to the dangerous generosity. He glanced at the offering but did not take it. Instead, he set aside his document and stepped closer, his gaze steady and unreadable. "There is no mistake," he said, his voice low but firm. "It is yours." Lara shook her head, the words spilling out in a rush. "I cannot accept this. People have begun to speak. They assume connections where none exist. I do not wish to add your name to their gossip." A flicker of something irritation, perhaps even hurt, crossed his expression, but it vanished almost instantly. "If society would dare speak my name," he replied, "let them speak truth." I gave it. She felt as though he had struck her with the weight of that declaration. The room seemed to thrum with the intensity of it, and for a moment she could scarcely breathe. His admission carried a boldness she could neither excuse nor comprehend. Why would a man as powerful as he risk dignity, reputation, and political standing for a woman whose presence was little more than an inconvenience to the world that shaped him? Before she could muster a response, distant voices echoed in the corridor, giggling, whispering, and she realized the worst had happened. Servants, lingering near enough to overhear, hurried away before she could call out to them. Their expressions carried the unmistakable gleam of scandal. Her heart plummeted. The Duke noticed too, his jaw tightening with cold precision. "It seems," he said quietly, "that the decision is no longer ours alone." That evening, the weather turned bleak, with sleet tapping rhythmically against the manor windows. Elara returned from her final tasks exhausted, only to find yet another sign of the Duke's silent protection, a carriage waiting at the east. Entrance to escort her from the garden path back to the servants' quarters. It was unnecessary, excessive, and witnessed by at least 4 members of the household. A gesture that could be interpreted only as interesting as part. By nightfall, rumors burned through Highthorne like wildfire. Elara felt their heat wherever she walked. She could not escape them, nor defend herself. The Duke, too, bore the weight of questioning glances and hushed exchanges, though he pretended not to notice. But the greatest blow came shortly after sunset. When Elara was summoned to the Duchess Dowager's private sitting room, the older woman regarded her with a composed, almost gracious expression that made the moment infinitely worse. "My dear," the Duchess began, smoothing her skirts with a slow, deliberate motion, "while you have served this household with diligence, it appears your presence now invites complications." Lara's breath caught. "Your Grace, I did nothing improper." "Tensions are irrelevant," the Duchess replied softly. "Perception rules our world. You will gather your belongings. You are to leave at dawn." The words settled over Elara with the crushing weight of inevitability. She bowed her head, unable to speak, unable to defend herself against consequences she had never sought. As she stepped into the hallway, the world around her blurred, one truth crystallizing through the haze. Whatever fragile connection had formed between herself and the Duke had now become the instrument of her undoing. Night pressed heavily against Highthorne Hall, its silence broken only by the steady rhythm of rain striking the windows like restless fingers demanding entry. Elara sat upon the edge of her narrow bed, a small satchel before her, contents sparse enough to fit her entire life into a single pitiful bundle. She folded each garment with mechanical precision, though her hands trembled with every movement. It felt unreal, packing away the remnants of a life she had never intended to build here, a life she had tried so hard not to tarnish. Yet here she was dismissed, not for wrongdoing, but for the Duke's kindness. A kindness she never asked for, never encouraged, and now could not forget, She hesitated as her gaze fell upon the velvet-wrapped book resting near her pillow. Its presence seemed to pulse in the dim candlelight, as though quietly insisting it held a meaning her departure could not erase. She reached for it, her fingers brushing the spine with a tenderness she wished she could ignore. She should have returned it, should have fought harder, should have found words strong enough to sever whatever fragile thread bound their fates. Instead, she had watched it unravel into something perilous. With a steadying breath, she set the book aside. She could not take it. She would not carry a trace of him into the uncertain void awaiting her. Thunder cracked sharply overhead. The storm had grown wilder, wind howling in the chimneys, as though the night itself mourned her exile. She fastened her satchel and rose, smoothing her plain gown as if dignity alone might fortify her against the sorrow lodged painfully in her throat. A servant had promised to escort her to the stables before dawn, but she preferred solitude. Farewells would only worsen the ache. A sudden, forceful knock jolted her. She froze. No servant would demand entry at such an hour with such urgency. Before she could react, the door swung open, and the Duke stood before her. Rain clung to his dark hair, soaked his cloak, and dripped onto the polished floorboards. His chest rose and fell as though he had run the length of the estate. Shadows carved harsh lines into his face, yet his eyes those restless. Searching eyes held an emotion she had not seen before, fear, tightly coiled beneath his composure. "My lord," she whispered, stepping back instinctively. "You should not be here." He shut the door behind him, the click sounding more like a vow than a gesture. "I learned of your dismissal," he said, voice roughened by anger he fought to contain. "Why was I not informed sooner?" Elara swallowed, clutching her hands together. "It was not necessary to trouble you with it." His gaze sharpened. "Everything concerning you troubles me." The words struck her with a force she had not braced for. She turned away, unable to withstand the intensity of his presence. "Your Grace, this is unwise. You jeopardize your reputation." "Let it be jeopardized," he retorted, taking a step closer. "I will not have you cast out as though you have committed a crime." "I have," she whispered, facing him again. "I allowed myself to be seen near you, spoken of near you, judged beside you. I have brought nothing but complication to your name." "You brought light into a house that forgot it," he answered, his voice low, steady, and unbearably sincere. Her breath faltered. That single sentence shifted everything: her certainty, her resolve, her carefully tended restraint. She saw it then, not merely concern in his expression, but a deep, warring tenderness. A tenderness he was trying and failing to restrain. "You must not say such things," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Not to me." He stepped closer, the storm's fury echoing in the rise and fall of his breath. "I have said nothing I do not mean." Her eyes stung. "If your advisers heard you, if Parliament heard your influence, your alliance is everything you have built. Everything I have built," he interrupted softly, "has become a cage I no longer wish to remain in." A silence stretched between them, taut as a tightened string. Candlelight flickered over his soaked form, casting shadows that clung to him like armor. He reached out, hesitated, then let his hand hover inches from her cheek, the restraint shaking through him. "Elara, every moment I have attempted to ignore this, I have failed." Her heart thudded painfully. She had seen him command rooms with a single glance, quell disputes with a single word, and hold unwavering control in every matter, political or domestic. Yet here before her he looked as though the ground beneath him had shifted beyond his mastery. "I do not know how to answer this," she whispered. "I do not know how to carry the weight of your regard, or not meant to carry it," he murmured. "I am." Their closeness stole the breath from her lungs. The storm raged beyond the window, lightning casting brief flashes across his face, illuminating the raw, unguarded truth within his eyes. He leaned in, not touching, merely closing the space inch by unendurable inch. She felt the warmth of his breath, the magnetic pull of a moment that had no place in the world they lived in. She closed her eyes. "If anyone sees you here," he answered with a whisper that trembled against her resolve, "let them." Her eyes flew open, colliding with his. The distance between them narrowed further until their foreheads almost touched. His hand rose once more, brushing the air near her jaw, as though he feared that touching her would break something sacred. She felt her will slipping, her heart betraying her with its desperate hope. He leaned closer, their breath mingling. The promise of a kiss hanging between them like a fragile, forbidden flame. But she drew back at the final instant, pressing a hand to her lips. "No, I cannot." Pain flickered across his features, though he masked it quickly. "Because of them?" "Because of you," she whispered. "Your honor would be shattered. I will not be the cause." He exhaled sharply, as though the restraint cost him dearly. Before he could speak, hurried footsteps sounded in the corridor. A panicked servant burst into the room, wide-eyed, water dripping from his coat. "Your Grace, you must come at once. The Duchess Dowager demands your presence. Word of the rumor has reached London?" The Duke's jaw tightened. He looked at Elara, the storm outside no fiercer than the turmoil in his gaze. "This is not finished," he said, and then he was gone, vanishing into the corridor, leaving Elara trembling in the quiet aftermath, knowing the world beyond that door was already sharpening its claws for whatever came next. Dawn crept reluctantly across the sky, its pale light smothered by the remnants of the storm. Elara stood beneath the eaves of the stable, her small satchel at her feet, waiting for the carriage the Duchess Dowager had ordered for her removal. The cold morning air bit sharply at her cheeks, but she scarcely felt it. Her thoughts churned restlessly, circling the memory of the Duke's confession. His words clung to her like frost, beautiful and painful, something she could neither embrace nor forget. She feared she had wounded him with her refusal. Yet she feared even more what acceptance might have cost them both. The estate grounds lay soaked and glistening, the gravel path shining with rainwater like a ribbon of shattered glass. Servants hurried about their duties, careful to avoid meeting her gaze. Their silence held the weight of finality, the kind bestowed upon those already banished in spirit even before the body leaves. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing her breath to steady. It was almost over, she told herself. A new life awaited beyond Highthorne Hall, one stripped of comfort. Yes, but also stripped of dangerous temptations. The clip of hooves broke the stillness as a carriage approached. But it was not the plain vehicle reserved for servants. It bore the Ravensmoore crest, gleaming proudly upon the lacquered door. The horses were finely groomed, their silver harnesses glinting in the cold light. Elara's breath hitched. This was no dismissal carriage. The Duke stepped down before it had fully stopped his appearance, struck her with the force of a blow. Exhaustion lined his face, and tension pulled tightly at his shoulders. Yet his gaze fixed unwaveringly upon her held a fierce, determined clarity. The storm had not abated within him. It had merely found new purpose. "My lord," she whispered, her voice fragile, "you should not be here." "After last night, after the rumor—" "There is no rumor," he said sharply, striding toward her. "There is only truth, and I intend to speak it clearly." Her heart pounded. She glanced around, aware of stable hands lurking at the edges, their curiosity barely concealed. "Please," she murmured, "you endanger yourself by coming here openly." He stopped before her, close enough that she could see the faint stubble on his jaw, evidence he had not slept. "Elara," he said, his tone softer, now painfully soft, "I will not stand by while you are cast out because of my actions. I will not permit it." "I am not being cast out because of you," she insisted, though the words felt delicate, insufficient. "I am being cast out because of what they choose to believe. We cannot change that." "We can," he replied, "if we choose to defy them." Her breath shuddered. A dangerous hope rose in her chest, one she dared not entertain. "You cannot defy them for my sake." "I can," he murmured, "and I will." Before she could answer, another figure emerged from the stable archway, the Duchess Dowager herself. Regal despite the early hour, her expression unreadable beneath her lace veil. Elara stiffened. The Duke turned, his jaw tightening. "Mother," he said, bowing with restrained civility, "you arrived sooner than expected." "I might say the same of you," she replied coolly. Her gaze shifted to Elara. "It appears you delayed your departure." Elara lowered her eyes. "Forgive me, your Grace." I, the Duchess, silenced her with a lifted hand. "This matter concerns my son." Alistair stepped forward. No, it concerns us all, and I will not allow you to banish an innocent woman to preserve a reputation I never asked you to guard." "I protect more than reputation," the Duchess answered, her voice low. "I protect the legacy entrusted to our name." "And you risk it for what? A fleeting infatuation?" He bristled, but controlled himself. "You think this is fleeting?" "I think," she said, her tone softening in a way that made Elara's heart twist, "that grief has left you vulnerable. Your late wife has been gone only 2 years. The wounds remain fresh." Elara's breath caught. She had not known this. The knowledge settled heavily in her chest, explaining the shadows she had seen in him, the walls he guarded, the loneliness that clung to him even in a crowded hall. The Duke exhaled slowly. "Grief makes one aware of what is precious. It does not cloud judgment, it sharpens it." The Duchess studied him for a long moment. "And you believe she," her gaze flickered to Elara, "is precious?" He did not look away. "Yes." The word fell like a stone into the morning quiet. Elara's breath faltered. She felt the world tilt beneath her, its axis shifting with the certainty in his voice. But the Duchess was not easily swayed. "You would tie your fate to a woman stripped of station, of fortune, of any advantage to your future. Parliament will laugh you into ruin." "I do not seek Parliament's approval," he replied. "You must," the Duchess answered sharply. "A duke cannot love or wed by impulse. Duty governs you, Alistair." Silence stretched taut between them. Then the Duke turned to Elara, his expression gentling, though his resolve remained unbroken. "You asked me last night what my regard would cost," he murmured. "Let me answer now. Anything it must." Her eyes stung as she struggled for words. "My lord, I cannot be the wedge that divides you from your family. I cannot walk beside you while shadows whisper behind our backs. You would rather walk away from me entirely?" he asked, pain flickering in his voice. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Every path before her felt steeped in sacrifice. If she accepted him, she doomed him to scrutiny. If she refused him, she broke something sacred within them both. The Duchess stepped closer, her voice unexpectedly gentle. "Child, look at me." Elara obeyed. "Do you care for him?" the Duchess asked. Elara felt her throat tighten. To lie would be cruel. To speak truth might be ruinous. Yet she could not deny the ache in her heart, the way his presence unsettled her, the way his words last night had carved themselves into her very breath. "Yes," she whispered, "but caring for him does not grant me the right to stand beside him." The Duchess studied her with an expression Elara could not decipher. After a long pause, she turned to her son. "If she leaves," the Duchess said slowly, "she will carry sorrow. If she stays, you will carry scandal. The question is simple, Alistair. Which burden can you bear?" He stepped toward Elara with unwavering certainty. "I would bear the world if it meant keeping her safe." Her breath broke. A tremor ran through her, fragile as frost beneath sunlight. The Duchess sighed, as though yielding to a truth she had resisted. "Then the scandal must be managed, not avoided." Elara stared at her, bewildered. "Your Grace, you will not leave," the Duchess said firmly. "Not until we have determined the path forward. You both have forced my hand. Now let us see if you possess the courage to face what follows." Lara looked to the Duke, who offered his hand, not touching, merely waiting. The choice was hers, and as her trembling fingers reached toward his, the rising sun broke through the clouds, casting gold upon the rain-soaked earth like a promise just beginning to unfold.